All right. We still have a couple of people jumping into the Zoom, but I think we'll go ahead and get started today. I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. I know that it's dinner and you have pressing things happening this evening. I'm going to ask if everyone could mute themselves so we don't hear any background noise. Family, your dog, your cat, your children running around if you're at my house. Welcome, everyone. Thank you all for joining us. My name is Jennifer Thompson, and I'm the Executive Director of NASW New Jersey and NASW Delaware chapters. And I am joined here today with some of my colleagues and friends. We have Dr. Claire Green Ford, the Executive Director of New York City NASW. We have Karen, their Legislative Director from New York City, and we have our Director of Advocacy, Jeff Feldman from New Jersey. And we are just so incredibly grateful that you're here this evening to chat with us. This is part 2 of our 3-part virtual advocacy series that is a multi-state collaboration. So we have people from all over the country joining us here today. We have New York City, New York State, Delaware, New Jersey, Texas, Arizona, you name it. So it's really fun to see all of the faces. Before I turn it over to our speakers, just a couple of housekeeping items. We really want today's conversation to be an opportunity to dialogue and interact with one another. So if you have questions about the work that we're doing or the advocacy, feel free to raise your hand or chat it in the chat box. We'll bring you on the line and we can have a conversation. We're going to be presenting a lot of information, and we have some resources that Jeff will share with you later, and a website link for you to download the materials for next week's virtual advocacy day as well. So with the housekeeping stuff out of the way, I'm going to turn it over to my friend and colleague, Dr. Claire. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Sorry, it's a bit of time to unmute. Thank you, everyone, and thank you again, Jen, for this opportunity. Thank you to all of New York City team and as well as those joining us from New York City. We're really excited to partake on this nationwide, honestly, advocacy initiative. You know, Jen and I talked about this a few weeks ago, and it's really exciting to see how much it's grown and growing to include our colleagues around the country with regards to advocacy and getting back to the root of our profession. I'm also incredibly grateful and blessed to be joined by our guru of all things government relations, as I'll affectionately call her, Karen Kuro, who's amazing in our chapter lobbyist, and she does a lot of work with our chapter, and it's been really helpful. And we thought it'd be really great to have someone who actually does this. Bonus, Karen is an amazing social worker and equestrian who could actually talk to us about what advocacy is and how we as social workers and individuals can be involved in advocacy. We hope that you take away from today that advocacy is a lifelong process. It's an everyday thing, and it's really important that as a profession we are leading the charge in advocating for social justice, for racial equity, and to make sure that we value the dignity and worth of each person. So without further ado, I'm going to pause, but I'm truly grateful to be on this journey of advocacy with all of you, and we look forward to partnering with you.
Great. So, hi guys, I am Karen Kuro. I'm at MSW and a member of NASW, actually specifically the New York City chapter. And I have had, as Claire mentioned, the distinct honor of representing the profession of social work in the halls of the Capitol in Albany now for just a little over 20 years. As such, I have had a front row seat to how important and impactful the voice of this profession can and has been in the policymaking arena. I actually came to the field of social work with every intention of clinical practice. But while studying for my BSW, I was assigned a field placement at a local police department as a domestic violence advocate. And through my tenure in that position and course of work, I really started to notice the rubber hits the road implications of policies that were crafted, drafted, and enacted on both the federal and the state level. And remember to this day, a pivotal moment for me was an evening I found myself in my office quite late, with a young woman and her 2-year-old daughter, whom I was attempting to help access various services, and we kept hitting roadblocks in relation to eligibility requirements and seemingly nonsensical benchmarks that needed to be met in order to access XYZ benefits. And this really led me to question who writes this stuff, and do they have any understanding of how inefficient it may be when operationalized. And I think it's that epiphany, so to speak, that forever altered my career path. And as such, I really set about carving out a route that used my social work skills to advocate for the profession and those that are served by the profession. During the last 2 decades, the profession has actively led and engaged in a number of campaigns that have ushered in landmark legislative victories in New York, such as the state's mental health parity statute, which is one of the strongest in the nation, a parity reporting bill that followed suit, that really holds the insurers' feet to the fire that we're trying to skirt around the statute, the state's licensure laws, broadening the arenas for clinical social workers and where they can practice, and banning recent so-called conversion therapies. We also are engaged in, I know at a national level in many state chapters, as well as New York City helped usher in one of the strongest juvenile justice reform bills in the nation by way of raising the age of criminal responsibility. And most recently, we were actively engaged in efforts to usher in sweeping police reform initiatives that just passed several weeks ago. And to Claire's point that this is a lifelong pursuit, many of those bills had sat stagnant really for year after year. And it wasn't until the horrific death of George Floyd and a response to that, that and the call for action finally, that our state legislature, after 10 years in some instances, finally was responsive. So those bills were teed up and ready to go because of the many years of advocacy on behalf of them for across professions and organizations. With respect to that, we really not only had an insight, and I think that this is, not specific to just New York, it's the process is the same from state house to state house, and even when working federal legislation, and really identifying those targets and having that inside capital game, but also being able to mobilize memberships to make calls to such targets and really let them know that you're paying attention. Currently, we're working with the Senate and Assembly to spearhead their campaigns on a bill that would establish a statewide office of racial equity, and a bill to create Senate and Assembly Standing Committee of Review on legislation in relation to racial equity. So I have seen the power of social work in action at the Capitol, and it is truly a force. And while that force may in part be required to have an everyday presence in the halls of the Capitol, in whatever state house you're residing in, to advance an issue, the weight and impact of constituent visits, I think, cannot be stressed enough. The teeth behind the presence is and always has been driven by membership. You and your voice, your expertise and tenacity and willingness to hold electables accountable is, at the end of the day, the engine for ground shifting movement. So it is with that kind of in mind that I would encourage your engagement. You are their voters, their conscience, and their barometer. They can hear about an issue every day in their respective Capitol offices, but if it's not resonating when they go back home to the districts, then it isn't real. There was actually a recent report, the Congressional Management Foundation report, that looked at citizen advocacy. And I think the general consensus really is that they have more power than they realized. Most the offices that were engaged in that report, over 1,400, they spoke to over 1,400 staffers and legislators, found that the most influential advocacy strategies for swaying an undecided member was communication from constituents. And that really didn't vary whether it was face-to-face, which is harder and harder these days in the advent of living in a pandemic, or by phone, or through an email, or even snail mail. Most of the staff surveyed at the federal level and staff that I've spoken to at state level, the state house, say the same thing, that a major influence on an undecided member to have constituent interaction. So since today's webinar is the precursor to your advocacy work next week, we're going to do a quick nuts and bolts rundown of what a meeting looks like and how to have a successful meeting, interaction call. And then we'll take questions after we've run through it. So you're going to be engaging in virtual lobbying efforts on a number of topics and under the umbrella of racial equity and social justice, depending upon which state you're residing in. And while the topics may vary slightly, the mechanics of a successful legislative visit really don't. He'll draw from your skill set and inherent knowledge. So I think first and foremost is understanding the process. And I'm going to really date myself here, but if you're unsure, Google Schoolhouse Rocks. Used to be on every Saturday morning when that was the only time that we could watch cartoons. And there was this nifty little video, I'm just a bill sitting on Capitol Hill. Ring a bell with anybody? The gist of that is really that all bills start with an idea, often by a constituent, an advocacy group like us or lobbyists. And those ideas are then pitched to potential legislative champions. And ultimately a bill is drafted and introduced into one or both houses simultaneously. They are sent then to various committees of review where they're analyzed and often amended and finally put on an agenda for a vote. But a caveat here, this process can and often does take years of work. So that gives us not only an opportunity to make sure that we're getting it right, but it also gives an opportunity for our voice to be heard on a consistent level. Once a bill is cleared through the committees, it's sent to the floor of each house. And if it clears that penultimate hurdle, it's then sent to the governor or to the president for analysis, where they can choose to sign it into enactment or veto it. So prior to your appointment, check on the bill to determine where in the process it resides. It's very important to know your subject. Going into these conversations, recognize that you are often the expert, while legislators and staffers are living and breathing the logistics of legislating each day. They are counting on you as a constituent and a professional who understands those real life implications that I referred to earlier in my discussion, the implications of the policies before them. So be sure to read through the materials that the chapters are providing you. They're easily digestible, one-pager talking points on each of the initiatives. Know your legislator. Before your meeting, take a few minutes to hop on their website and know which party they belong to, review their press releases and sponsorship of bills, so you go in with a general understanding of where on the political spectrum they fall. It will definitely make your conversation go much smoother. Know yourself, and what I mean by that is know why this issue or these issues are of concern to you as a constituent and as a social worker. Weave that perspective into your talking points. Really make it real for them. And be concise and stay focused. So stay on your message. You have, as I mentioned, been provided with talking points. So hit your talking points, make your notes before going into your meeting, and be sure that you're clear on what your ask is and making your ask. What actionable effort would you like them to take action on? Some of these bills we're going to be asking them to vote on the floor in favor of. Some of these bills you may be asking them to be a co-sponsor and try to persuade any of their colleagues who may be on the fence. And really tailor your responses to their positions. So if they're in strong agreement with your position, thank them, but don't let the opportunity go by to really kind of strategize with them. Ask them to help get the legislation passed by co-signing onto the bill, talking about the bill with their colleagues, doing letter op-eds, letters to the editor, helping to really build that campaign. And ask them to get back to you about what happens and when they talk to other legislators, and helping you to target where there may be spots that we need to circle back to. And always ask them who else you should be talking to. If they're undecided after you've gone through your points, don't push them too hard, but try to find out why they feel this way and offer either to explain the issue again or get them additional information. And then make sure you circle back to them to see where they've decided. Some of these issues come down to counting heads and counting votes. Every single one can count. I've seen bills pass or fail on one vote. If they're opposed, these are the harder and more difficult conversations, but determine why they feel this way and how strongly they feel, and politely address their concerns, of course, but don't spend a lot of time trying to convince someone who really won't listen, and thank them for their time. And then, of course, follow up. It's an opportunity to check in after the visits, perhaps in district office, provide additional materials if you promised them, or merely send them a thank you note in an email. We had at one point launched a little mini campaign thanking a legislator for every time that they were attentive to an issue that was identified by the chapters as a priority, and it got to be where the legislators not only looked forward to their thank you note, but they would stop me in the hallway and make note of the fact that they knew that social workers as a profession were paying attention to what was going on. And then breathe. You've then finished perhaps your first legislative meeting and lived to tell about it. You've added a crucial voice to the social work of the social work profession and process, and I'm hoping in the process you've caught the advocacy bug. Dr. Claire?
Thank you so much. Yeah, absolutely. I hope everyone does catch the advocacy bug. I was wondering if you could also draw the parallel that this is a very similar process for whether or not someone's calling the mayor's office, the sheriff's office, because, for example, New Jersey is focused on police reform, and some of the bills that they're trying to support are bills that we actually were able to pass a few weeks ago in New York City. So obviously it's looking different. And our lens is police reform through the lens of racial and social and criminal justice reform. So some of the bills that we're supporting. But if you could draw the parallel for people that, you mentioned it, but it's a similar process, as well as the fact that as social workers, we already have the skills. I think often we may hear, but I don't know how to, or I'm uncomfortable making these calls, or I'm not sure what to say. But if you could speak a little bit about the fact that whether it's the mayor's office or, calling your Congress person, it's a similar process, or your police department, because some of this call to action is calling the police department to ask, hey, do you have these things in place? But also like the skill sets that are needed that are clearly social worky. But if you can talk a little bit about those, just to allay any concerns or just to provide a little bit more insight, that would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. So it is exactly the same process, whether you're at the, and I've lobbied both at the federal level and at the state level, and even in city council. The process is the same. The process is people, right? So the process is you sharing your social work perspective and your real understanding of, when I talked about earlier how the rubber hits the road in some of these policies and how they don't make sense. or how the policy that you are proactively advocating for would make better sense, you are often the expert in the room. There is, legislators, like I said, whether they're living and breathing the logistics of this all day, every day, but they can't be an expert on every issue. And if you've taken the time to meet with them or their staff, and a little sidebar, often it will be their staff. Don't be discouraged by that. I know I've heard in the past that folks that have participated in lobby days, well, I only got the staffer. You know what? Those staffers, oftentimes, they have their kind of finger on the pulse of what's going on. They're feeding that information to their member later that day or later in that week. That pipeline is open. So I would say, as long as you know your material and you know your information, and but the flip side to that is also, don't feel like you have to know the answer to every question. I don't know the answer to every question they ask me sometimes, and I say, you know what, that's a really good question. Let me get back to you, and I do, as long as you get back to them and you build that rapport and that relationship. And every time you do this, the next time it'll be a little bit easier too. And it will only take a couple of times before you're really developing relationships.
I think that's so great, Karen. I think particularly in this endeavor, we are thousands of social workers calling our local, city, state, and federal government. And our stories are going to be a little bit different. Our connection to the issue is going to be a little bit different. And so we really want to encourage people to find sort of the reason that you personally care about it, because often that personal connection is really important to your local officials. And I'm a constituent. This is why I care about it. I'm also a social worker. This is why we care about it. And that's a very powerful statement. You're not going to be a subject matter expert on all of this, to be quite honest. Right now, there's a lot of uncertainty around the issue of policing, and there may not be a ton of answers right now. So it's okay to not have all the answers and say that the organization will get back to them.
Absolutely.
I'm wondering if we should now jump over to Jeff, who can walk us through each pieces of the asks. For this endeavor next week, we have 3 different one-pagers. We've got a local, a state, and a federal overview page that we'll be able to share with you. And Jeff will walk us through sort of the nuts and bolts, the nitty-gritty of what we're going to be talking about next week. And again, we want for you to jump in and ask questions. So feel free to do so in the chat box or raise your virtual Zoom hand and we'll open up the line for you. Jeff?
Thank you, Jen. And thanks, Karen and Dr. Claire, for all that great information. So I want to talk through, as Jen said, a little bit about how the campaign is going to work last night and kind of what it's going to mean when you engage in this work. And really, one of the really nice points about the work that we're going to be doing next week when we start making phone calls, and especially you folks who are not paid lobbyists or who are not, here as a representative necessarily of an organization, you are the folks that they want to hear from. You're the constituents. And that's the big buzzword there. When you're reaching out to your elected officials, whether you're calling your local mayor or you're calling your U.S. senator, I mean, one of the things you want to make sure they know is that you're a constituent, because you are the folks that help get them elected and help keep them in office. So as we approach that campaign, as we approach this campaign, that's a really good thing to keep in mind. So what we're going to be engaging in next week, rather than in-person visits, since COVID is kind of prohibiting the ability to do that, we're going to be engaging in a phone-a-thon campaign. And what we're asking people to do over these 2 days is just take 15 minutes or so out of their day to make these phone calls. And what I'll do now is kind of walk through how that process is going to work for you. Let me try and share my screen. Hopefully you all can see that. It looks like it's just a Google screen right now. So most of the NASW chapters, if not all of the NASW chapters that are involved in this initiative, are setting up landing pages on their website. And I apologize if this is going to be a little New Jersey specific, but that's what I have access to. So I'm going to show you how to find this information on New Jersey's website. If you go to naswnj.org, on our homepage, you'll see we have an advocacy tab, and then at the very bottom, call to action. So when you click that link, it's going to take you to our call to action webpage, which has the information about the meetings that are coming up. And then just about an hour ago, I've added to our webpage some of the handouts and tools that we're going to be using for the campaign. And you can click on these to view them online or download them right from this page on our website. So again, it's advocacy, call to action, and then scroll down and you'll see the handouts and tools. One piece that is not here yet that will be, once we have a chance to format it, is a document that's going to tell you how to find and contact your elected officials. It's going to be a short 2-pager, just like most of the other things. So that'll be available as well. But what I want to do right now is just kind of walk through that and show you how easy it is to find your officials if you do not know who they are. So we have a website that I found through some Google searching called MyReps. And again, this link, myreps.datamade.us, that'll be available in the how-to document. So when you go to this MyReps page, and it asks you to find your federal, state, county, and local elected representatives, this is pretty accurate from the searching that I did. There's not a lot of websites that you can go to that will find everything for you at once. And what I've found from looking at this website is that it is really good at finding federal, state, and county level contacts. Town, municipal level contacts takes a little more work and it isn't always on this website. But this is a great one-stop to find those 3 other levels. So all you're going to do is put your address in the search bar and make sure that all the levels of government are checked. And then you hit search, and it's going to bring up my township. And again, you'll see it can't find my local representatives. When I click on township, it just brings me to county level. But looking at this list at the top, it's got my county level officials. I can find my county clerk, my freeholder. What I'm really looking for in this list for the calls I want to make is I see contact for the Somerset County Sheriff. And when you click the contact button on the side, it'll bring up a little pop-up that gives you a phone number to contact that person. If there's an email address or a website, it'll give you that information. And then also in these little link buttons, you can also see if there's a website, that's where it is. It'll take you to that page. This little bar is in my way. So that brings me to the sheriff's page for my county, where I can find their phone number and some more information about the sheriff before I make that call. And then if we go back to the My Reps page again, as I keep scrolling down, I get my New Jersey representatives. I can find my state senator, Bob Smith, right here. And again, contact will give me his phone number, will give me his email address. We're specifically thinking about phone campaigns right now. And again, there's a link to his website if he has one, his Facebook page, so you can do a little more research. And then I've also got my 2 state assembly persons. Our lower chamber in New Jersey is called the General Assembly. Some of you may have other names for other states. I don't know what other folks may be called, maybe representatives. But in New Jersey, it's assembly person. So I can find my 2 assembly persons here and get their contact information. And then again, further down, I can find the contact information for my congressperson and my 2 US senators. So this one website will get you to most of the information you're looking for. And then the easiest way that I've found to find local contact information is just to Google your town. So if I Google Franklin Township, New Jersey, the first hit that comes up, Township of Franklin. And then every town's website is going to be a little different, but generally you're going to find it button or a tab that talks about government or departments. And there's also this about button that's going to be important in a lot of instances. So I played around a little bit with this before our call. And what I found is that when I click on About Franklin, my township website will tell me not just my mayor, it actually goes out of the way to list all of my contacts. So I didn't want to just leave this as an option because not every municipality is going to have this. But as I scroll through this, I thought this was the page that had my mayor's information. Maybe I'm missing it. United States legislator. Maybe it was into the government page. But anyway, when you go to the government page, if you go to departments, and for instance, there's police, I click on police and I get the township phone number for my local police department. Some pages may have the name of the police chief. It looks like mine doesn't, but I have the phone number here that I can reach out to. It's the non-emergency phone number and call to ask to talk to somebody about policies and procedures that police use when they're in contact with residents and citizens of the town. So that's really the best way to find your local information. Then once you have that, you're going to go back to these sheets, and every state will have something that's a little bit different. I'm going to start with the federal level sheet because that's actually going to be similar, if not exactly the same for every state. So I click my link, it'll open up the page at another level, and you'll see right here, this is our federal level advocacy sheet. The federal level advocacy sheet, we are asking people to make calls to both US senators and to your congresspersons. Now, the nature of these calls is going to be a little different depending on what state you're in, but the thing that's going to be the same is that the House of Representatives has already passed a bill that we are supporting. It's called the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, and it was passed on June 23rd in the House of Representatives. It's HR 7120. So one of the calls, or two of the calls actually that you'll be, or sorry, one of the calls that you'll be making is to your congressperson. And in this instance, what we want to just do is reach out and call them and tell them we're thanking them for sponsoring or supporting that legislation. I think it was, I think the vote was 230, there it is, 236 to 181 yays to nays. So 236 representatives voted to support this legislation. And in this instance, because we're trying to impart how important police reform is to our community and to social workers, we want to call and say, thank you. We really appreciate that you've done that. And then also ask them to work with their senators to try and get the senators to work with Mr. McConnell to try and bring the bill or a similar bill to vote in the Senate. What you will need to do if your chapter hasn't done it in advance is just look at how your congresspeople voted on that bill, HR 7120. For New Jersey, we have 12 congresspersons. All 10 of our Democratic representatives voted in favor of this legislation, and I believe 9 of the 10 were co-sponsors. It was just the 2 Republican congresspeople in New Jersey that voted against that. So when we're calling our congresspeople here in New Jersey, if your congressperson is one of the 10 Democrats, you're going to call and give them the thank you message. And if they did not support it, you're going to say, you know, there's a bill, HR 7121, that was that you did not support, and you know, I'm really disappointed that you decided to do that. You could ask, perhaps, if you could ask why they decided not to support it. You're probably going to be talking to a staffer and not to your congressperson directly, but if you ask for follow-up information, they will try to follow up with you. But again, we just want to convey to the House of Representatives how important this issue is. And then this other call you're going to make at the federal level is to your 2 US senators for your state. In the Senate, there has not, to the best of my knowledge, been a bill introduced that is a companion to the one that passed the House of Representatives, the HR 7120. So when you call to speak to your senator, and again, you will most likely get a staffer, we have a sample script here of what you could say when you call your senator. In New Jersey, that would be Senators Booker and Menendez. And you'll say, as a voting constituent in your district, as a social worker, as a member of the National Association of Social Workers, this says I am writing. It should actually say I'm calling. Oops. I'm calling to urge you to protect black and brown constituents in your state from police brutality by enacting strong police reform legislation. And you're going to ask them to introduce or support legislation that is similarly modeled on the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And again, the one-pager has a couple of bullet points about why we're supporting that bill and what it does. So if the staffer is asking questions about what those provisions are, if you scroll back up in the one-pager, you'll see we've kind of highlighted 10 key points that we are in favor of that were in the George Floyd Justice for Policing Act. So the background, again, as Karen mentioned, is important, and it's here for you to be able to support what you're saying. And then we're also, I don't have it available yet to show you, but there will also be a tracking form that we are going to create that will be available via our webpage, where you can list who you called, what the outcome of your call was, and make a couple little notes. And that information will get sent back to our database so that we can track as we're going along. How many calls are made? How many were successful? How many did you feel were not successful? Did you talk to your mayor or did you talk to your mayor's assistant? You'll be able to list all of that information. So that's a quick run through of the federal level one-pager. Let me stop for a second and just say, Jen, are there any questions or anybody have their hands up so far, Jen?
Nobody with their hands up. For those of you who have been watching the sidebar, though, there were a couple of questions on how you find out about your representatives' votes. And Brian, thank you for sharing the link, but we'll make sure that we follow up with that as well so that you'll have the website. It'll be easy to use and navigate. You'll be able to jump on that and just search for voting records.
Yeah, thank you for the person that shared that. And we can put that link on our webpage as well.
Yep, and another question from Whittian, what's considered a failed or successful call? I would say this, every call that we make is successful, right? That's fantastic. I think if you don't get anybody or you just get their voicemails, I would suggest maybe that's an unsuccessful call. But if you get a live person on the phone, that's what we're looking for right now. We're looking for bodies and to make sure that they hear and we can register our opinion, support, dissent, et cetera with them. And in that form, we're also going to ask for you to say, you know, if there is follow-up information that's needed, did people look for additional information? Are there other things that you think that you should or the chapter should send out? We'll ask you for that feedback so that we can organize together the follow-up. And if you've got somebody that seems even moderately interested, we'd like to hear that feedback as well, because that'll be a good sort of tickler for us to continue to build those relationships. The other thing that I just wanted to add with that is really framing that this is the first part of advocacy, and this will not just be a once and done endeavor on our part. Success in this also looks like you building that connection with your local representative. It looks like building a relationship with your local mayor. It looks like building a relationship with your local police department, and being the entree into your community and making sure that they know that social workers not only in their community, but also watching what they do. And that we are here, we're watching, and we'd like a seat at that table. So just beginning that conversation is also an incredibly successful endeavor and really meaningful to the work that we are engaged in, and will be a long battle.
All right, thank you, Jen. So I'm gonna move along, but we can stop again for questions before the end of the call tonight. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the state level advocacy form because that is going to vary from state to state based on what kind of actions have already been implemented. in response to police brutality. New Jersey's actually a little bit behind on the issue compared to some other states. For those of you who are here in New Jersey, just really quickly, when you click on the campaign, the background that we put together, because there was not a lot of legislation to support New Jersey, is based on research we did from a number of different websites. We used some information that our colleagues at NASW Massachusetts put together in their Criminal Justice Reform Committee. Our work is informed by the Campaign Zero platform, as well as a few others, other institutes that have been doing this kind of research about what type of reform is needed to make sure that persons of color are not singled out and are not being adversely affected when they come in contact with police. In New Jersey, we broke it out to 4 steps. There is one bill that is currently stalled and has not moved that we're going to be asking legislators to support. And that is a bill that institutes civilian review boards in all municipalities. And then we're also going to tell our legislators that we want to make sure that tax dollars are being used on alternatives to policing when appropriate, and other ways to serve the communities rather than a full police response. And the background to that is here. Then there is another bill that we are going to be asking that has already passed our General Assembly, but has not been introduced in the Senate yet. And that is a bill that would classify the use of chokeholds in New Jersey as a use of deadly force. And what we are asking for is a little different. Use of deadly force does not mean it's forbidden. It just means that there are very strict categories of when deadly force is considered appropriate to use in New Jersey. We're going to be asking, when we call our state senators, that they support a version of this legislation and actually might even take it a little further to ban or criminalize the use of chokeholds. So the messaging is going to vary slightly on that one. And again, the background is here. And then lastly, we're going to be asking them to consider ending qualified immunity, which is what lets officers escape responsibility sometimes for their actions and limits their ability to be criminally and civilly prosecuted. So that's what we're going to be doing at the state level in New Jersey. And then to wrap up, I'd like to just spend a little time on the local level, because this is a slightly different ask. And I think all the states are doing this the same way. What we're doing all the way down at the local level is we are targeting specific policies and behaviors that each local municipal police department or county police entity through the sheriff's department might be implementing. And we're going to be calling mayors and sheriffs and chiefs of police, and we're going to be telling them that we are concerned about appropriate use of force and protections for citizens when they have interactions with police. And so we're going to be asking them these 6 items on our advocacy guide sheet. And these are kind of yes/no items that you'll be able to check off on the report form when you check back in after you make calls. So when you call your mayor, your sheriff, your chief of police, we're going to be asking them some simple questions. One, we're going to ask them, do they have use of force guidelines for their officers, and particularly the use of lethal force? Hopefully, most of these people are going to say, yes, they already have something like that. And if they do, we're going to ask them if those guidelines are available to the public and how the public can find them. And if they're not available to the public, we're going to ask that they can be made available to the public. And then if they say they do not have that type of specific guideline at the specific department you're speaking to, we're going to ask that they please implement guidelines along those lines. Next, we're going to be asking, are there provisions for civilian oversight of the police department? Currently in New Jersey, every department does not need to have a civilian oversight board. Some do, some don't. So we'll be calling to see if in your township there is a civilian oversight board or civilian oversight panel. And again, if yes, we're going to ask the information for that panel, who's on it, how do people get appointed to it, anything else that you as an individual may think you might want to know about that panel. How do you get in touch with them? We're going to make sure that all that information is public facing. And again, if the answer is no, we're going to ask that we think it's really important for them to implement these civilian oversight panels. We're going to be asking what the minimal threshold for indicting an officer for misconduct is. We're going to ask what kind of policies they have in place at that specific department to register formal complaints against officers. And how does the office ensure that complaints are appropriately adjudicated when received? And then again, if there is a complaint process, yes, we'll note that and ask where that is for public review. And if no, we're going to ask that they implement such a process. Step 4, we're going to ask, are there provisions in place for how body cameras are deployed? And are there provisions that prevent an officer from removing a body camera if they decide that they don't want to be wearing that camera in the middle of an interaction? Again, if yes, we're going to ask, where are those policies available for public view? How do citizens find out that this is a policy that the police should be following? And again, if no, we're going to ask that body camera policies be implemented. And then the last ask is going to be, do they currently have any type of community outreach personnel or non-full police response methods for responding to issues that don't warrant a full police or full criminal response? When we have issues related to homelessness, to loitering, to public intoxication, to somebody maybe passing a $20 counterfeit bill, we're going to ask if they have methods in place where you don't have to send an officer who's ready to draw fire on somebody to respond to those issues. And again, if yes, we're going to ask, who are those people? Are they in the community regularly, or do they just show up when they're called? Do residents know them? How are those people connected with calls? How do you route the calls when they come in from 911 or whoever's calling? You know, how do you ensure that the response is going to the right person? And again, this is a perfect place where your social work skills and backgrounds and experience working with communities and in communities can help you figure out, you know, what are the best types of questions that you might want to ask when you're speaking to somebody about that issue. And then lastly, we're going to close by just reminding them that these type of reforms are a priority for you as a constituent, as well as for you as a social worker, and that we want to make sure that our municipality is continuing to put those issues at the forefront, and to let them know, if it's appropriate, based on how the conversation goes, that when election time comes around, you're not going to support local candidates who don't make this issue a priority. Because again, we need to make sure that we're holding our elected officials accountable, and voting is how we do that. So that's a quick run through of the local advocacy guide. I know we're almost out of time, so I'm going to stop now and just see if we have any final questions before we wrap.
We do actually. We have Sue on the line. I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself. Sue, I see your hand raised.
Okay, thank you. I have 2 questions. Does it do any good to contact purple senators for the Policing Act who are not in your state? That's number 1. Number 2 is, I've already contacted several times my congressmen and my senators. I mean, how much is too much? I don't want to overwhelm them. Sure. And they're already for it, so it seems a bit, why?
Right. So to answer the question about the purple senators, in New Jersey, we are both blessed and cursed that we have a primarily blue delegation, a primarily Democratic delegation. In Jersey, what we're calling our senators, we already know that they're going to support some of those issues, but we still want to call and let them know that we are behind them and we support them supporting them. But for those of you who are in states where you have independent senators or when you have Republican senators, those are really the calls that need to be heard. But to answer the question about calling senators in other states where you don't reside, that's where it gets a little iffy because you're not a constituent, so they're not really going to pay attention. When you call, they're going to ask you what your zip code is or what town you live in. And if you're not their constituency, they're really not going to pay attention to the call. But if you are in one of those states where you do have purple senators who may be on the fence, or you have deep red Republican senators, those are the ones that you want to say to them, let Leader McConnell know you want this issue brought to the floor.
Hey,
and then
Can I jump in? I would suggest for the purposes of this exercise that we don't also call outside states. You know, if the states are participating in it, I would look to their leadership in their NASW. The one thing that I want to be mindful of is that sometimes we don't know the political nuances in each state. And I would hate for us to be the causer of chaos when all we're doing is trying to fight for good. So I think if I had already made those phone calls, it sounds like you have, which is awesome. Thank you, Sue. Loud social worker, good kindred spirit. I would suggest focusing on the other local calls and maybe working our way through like the local calls. Unless I would say the only caveat to that is if you've made the calls and you haven't spoken with a live human, I think it's completely appropriate to call back until you speak to a warm body, even if it's
I emailed them about a dozen.
And again, yes. if they have supported something, it doesn't hurt to reach out and say thank you, because usually they only hear from us when something's wrong and we want something. So if you're trying to continue to build a relationship and further a relationship, letting them know you appreciate what they've done already is good practice.
Yeah.
I also want to just,
go ahead.
I just want to also share that it's important that we also look at it, whether it's, someone is independent, Democrat, Republican, we never know where someone's going to stand. And so as NASW is a nonpartisan organization, and we have just as many social workers who are Republican as they are independent, as they are Democratic. And so this is not about party, this is about advocacy. And you can be surprised. I can say in New York, particularly with some of the police reform, we were shocked to find out that some of the people that we work closest with actually had been supporting police unions and getting money from them. And so they had been on the fence, and it was like, oh, this is why you're on the fence, because you have taken money from the police unions and you're a Democrat. And it doesn't matter. And it could be Republicans that are like, no, we're absolutely not taking that. So I think it's very important that we also make sure that in this vein of valuing the dignity and worth of each person and always operating from a space of wanting to be inclusive and understanding of other points of views, that we recognize that this is above partisanship, that this is about advocacy, and that sometimes people are going to surprise the heck out of you. The person that you think is going to support it may be someone who's not, and the person who you think is going to be opposed to it, potentially we tend to think of that based on party, maybe the person who's actually championing this for you or will champion it. So I just want to make sure that we're also sharing that in this space, that this is really about advocacy and getting to the roots of our profession. This is the foundation of social work. Literally, we are professional troublemakers. We should be making trouble everywhere we go for the better good of society and for humankind.
Thank you, Dr. Claire. Jeff, you wanted to respond to the second part of Sue's question, which now I've forgotten what it is, but you're also on mute.
No, I think we got that. That was
okay.
Calling folks from that we've already called before.
Great. There is a question in the chat box regarding what happens if the leader of the conference is already oppositional to our stance. How do we move them? I think we call, right? We call and we let our opinion be known. We let your voice be known. And then we continue to follow up. I know this isn't the only virtual advocacy that us as a group of individuals and social workers, and certainly NASW is going to engage in. This is the first call. They're movable, right? So we're going to call, we're going to tell them what we think, and we're going to fill out that little form, and we're going to figure out how we follow up with them, whether it's them having pressure from like-minded colleagues That's sometimes really helpful. So all of their peer pressure was real. We will continue to work on that. And Karen, I see that you've unmuted yourself. Do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up and say they're especially movable this year, depending on what their electoral map is looking like. This is a really important election year, and some members that are fall in that purple zone are, I think, very movable this year.
Thank you, Karen. And I just want to be cognizant of time. It is 6:02. So is there anyone else who's on the line who had questions about the Advocacy Day itself? Raise your virtual hand. No? So I wanted to just close us out today. I know you all have families and dinners probably waiting in the background for you with just our next steps. So as you all know, the virtual advocacy days are slated for the 28th and 29th. We are so grateful that NASW National President Mitt Joyner is going to kick off our event on the 28th with a live Zoom session with us. So for those of you who are already signed up, I'm sure you are because that's how you ended up here, we hope that you'll join us for that live kickoff event. You won't be required to participate in the full 2 days just sitting there calling people. Zoom fatigue is real. We understand that. The idea was really that we just had a very concentrated period of time that social workers are calling their elected officials and doing the advocacy so that we could sort of benchmark it. During those days, you're going to download the forms, you're going to go to the websites that Jeff has shared with us and that your chapters will follow up with, and you'll make the phone calls. We would love for you to share that with your networks, encourage your social work friends, members, non-members, this is all inclusive, to make phone calls with you. Post on social media, use the hashtags. We will be sending out a social media toolkit later in the week so that you'll have hashtags and ideas of things to share, Twitter responses for those of you who understand the world of Twitter better than I do. And at the end of those days, we're going to ask that you fill out the forms. Just tell us who you've called, give us some feedback so that we can disseminate that not only with the states for follow-ups, but also to paint a picture of the advocacy that happened. It's really important that we be able to share your work and sort of bring it all together and paint the picture of how social work voices come together. And then lastly, on each virtual day, we will be having sort of an end of the day recap. So if you want to pop onto a Zoom for 20, 30 minutes, we're going to ask you how it went. What did you learn? What was frustrating? What worked? Just to hear how your experience is going from all over the country. It's a nice way. In a real advocacy day on the Hill, we'd all pop into a room together for a quick debrief. And so this is our good try at making sure that we remain true to some of those best practices. What will happen after the event? We will be pulling all the data together. We'll be sharing that broadly amongst all of the chapters. And then we do plan on having a follow-up call sometime in August to share the important work and outcomes and dialogue about who we've been able to move and who needs more work and what the next step is, which I know was one of the questions I saw in the box about what point do we move to direct actions like protests and et cetera. The truth is, I think this is really a direct action. Calling, engaging in advocacy right now is direct action. And since we are all in the place of social distancing, depending on what level of reopening your state is at, this is where we're at. And I think this is a really great starting place for all of us, while also recognizing that we're in the midst of a global pandemic as well. So if there is anything else that Jeff or Dr. Claire or Karen?
Just one last thing that somebody brought up in the chat before we disconnect. This recording, you can find it again on the NASW New Jersey Facebook page where it's been streaming live, so it will be in the videos there. We are also going to share it on YouTube, and you will be able to find the link on the NASW New Jersey call to action subpage where it's listed right now for you to register. The registration link will be replaced with a link to YouTube so you can watch it again on demand.
Thank you so much. And thank you. This is really great. Karen, I want to sincerely thank you for your time, your wisdom, your knowledge, and your overall beautiful person that you are, and everyone that's on this call. One of the things I put in the chat box, and I do want to make sure that I say is that just as we are trained in social work, whether we do micro, meso, or macro practice, we have to understand the why. Why is someone opposed to the position? Why are they not supporting it? Just as much as why they are supporting it. we are human at the very level, and that's where we're connecting. We're connecting on human levels, and our legislators, ourselves, we are human. And so finding out the why behind someone's story is who we are as a profession, and we are uniquely skilled to do this. I mean, there's no better profession and individual than you, trained on this call to actually do this, because we have the skill sets. Finding out the story can help you move that person and move the needle, and or maybe even move your point of view. So our goal is to make sure that we are inclusive of all points, and the way that we learn and are wise is that we include all points, whether they're our views or not. It's important that we embrace those. So find out the why, because if you know the why, you know your strategy and how you can actually move that person.
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you to Karen and Jeff for joining us and sharing your knowledge and your wisdom. Thank you to all of you who've come on tonight and are going to engage in the virtual advocacy. We encourage you to share the videos with your friends, but also encourage them to sign up and engage and participate in this. It's important work that we're doing, and we're really grateful for all of your participation and support. So with that, everyone have a great evening, and we will see you next week. Bye all.
Bye.